Well, hello and welcome to this a bit of a different Just Get a Real Job this week. So obviously we just come up for 4 years, so we thought we'll treat ourselves and go into the studio today to record for the first time. And I'm going to hand over to former guest who was on a few months ago, Adair Murray, who's going to chat to me about
Thanks very much.
podcasting in 4 years of Just Get a Real Job. I feel a bit, it's because I'm not used to being on camera. I'm like,
we're very fancy today. I've worn a shirt, I've got a collar on, doesn't happen very often.
Not in front of StreamYard anymore, so it's a bit,
exactly.
It's different.
No, thanks for having me and asking me to do this. It's a real honour, and congratulations on 4 years of Just Get a Real Job. It's been one of my go-to listening podcasts in the gym, so thank you for entertaining me. And obviously it's a great podcast for the creative industries in Scotland and just hearing everyone's viewpoints. But I'd like to start off just by asking you what made you want to start. Like, what's the story? Why did you? I mean, I'm not a maths genius, but 4 years obviously takes us back to 2020 when there was loads happening in the world.
I know, one original idea making a podcast in COVID. Who would have thought of that?
But I just wanted to find out what the story was that made you want to start Just Get a Real Job in the first place.
To be honest, like when I started the podcast, I didn't think it would be a thing. Like I thought I had some interesting friends on the masters. I did a screenwriting masters at Edinburgh Napier years ago, and I thought there's some people on this that are quite interesting. Might be cool to chat to them. So I just had some friends on. But I'll put it out. It's lockdown, little project. I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to edit. I didn't know how to promote a podcast. I mean, it's all trial and error. I still don't really know everything now. I'm still learning 4 years later. But I was just interested. I thought when I was sort of wanting to get into the industry, like when I started doing this show, like I didn't even work in TV. I didn't have a career or anything. I was just graduating and I didn't know what I was doing. So I thought there's not really anything out there for people to understand the creative industries, for people to, understand how to navigate this weird, industry, especially something like TV or, any sort of aspect of the creative industry. It's quite complicated. So I kind of wanted to start for that. Yeah. Just to help people understand what it's like and get people's stories. And I'm just really curious. Yeah. I've always been quite a curious person. So,
and I didn't know that actually. So this podcast started before your sort of television.
So I was working in adult care at the time. I just graduated from a master's. I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. I was just working, I worked in adult care at the time and just was doing this podcast and I was trying to work in TV, but at that point I was being a runner and my first proper job was in COVID. So I didn't have a clue what I was doing.
Right. That's interesting. So in a way it maybe opened up your mind to the industry before you'd properly took your first step into it.
I think it's probably the best network until
I was going to say, that's a really clever network.
It wasn't even the reason, but it has definitely helped. Yeah. Yeah. Good way to learn.
And I was thinking maybe it was like an FU to our Prime Minister at the time who had said, rethink, retrain or whatever.
This is the other part of it, which you reminded me very thankfully of. At the time, there was that whole get a job in cyber thing had come out. So I was like, that inspired the sort of theme of the podcast, that the whole Just Get a Real Job, that idea of, sort of rebellion against the government. Because the theme song that we used to have, which I've actually taken away now because we have a new government and I thought I'll give them a chance to. I just felt like maybe the theme song could, I don't know, we'd had it for a long time, so that's kind of why we made it an instrumental now. But the whole the whole song was about retraining and that Elliot wrote for the show. So that was definitely part of it as well. It was
Elliot,
a sort of
your editor, of
Elliot,
course.
our brilliant editor, who's done it for 4 years. So it's very kind of him.
Well, that's great. And obviously where the podcast started and where it's got to and stuff like that, we'll get into in a wee bit.
And I suppose the other thing I should mention is our listeners very kindly sent in a lot of questions on Instagram.
I was going to say, so Jamie put out a questions request on Instagram. Was it just Instagram?
Just Instagram, yeah. I've neglected all the other followers on the various platforms. I apologise.
That's fine. Instagram's probably the most connectivity one, isn't it? So, and engagement. So we'll start off with one of the questions from the lovely listeners. So what has surprised you over the 4 years of running your own podcast?
How much work it takes, maybe, is one of it. No, not at all. I think that kind of going in, it's a lot. But I think what surprised me most is that people were interested in listening to it. As I said earlier when I started it, I thought, maybe be a few mates. But it's mad that people all over, we have listeners this month, for example, Singapore seems to have had lots of listeners, which is very random. So you see these random countries like, what the hell are they listening to this show for? So that's quite amazing that people actually want to listen and engage. But I think what surprised me most is how much I've got out of it personally, not just professionally. Obviously, I was joking about the network and stuff, but personally, like I find it like it's kind of changed my life a little bit. It's made me more confident.
Yeah,
you get to do these amazing things like be in a studio like this in Glasgow, for example, or doing the Fringe, or going behind the scenes at the Fringe, or doing like a film festival, just meeting people. It's just lovely. Like gives you access to people you find really interesting.
Well, we were slightly joking earlier about the networking element of it, but I suppose in a way it has served that purpose, whether it's not to further your career creatively, but just in terms of meeting people and then branching out and asking, because that's basically how podcasts become successful, isn't it? And we'll get on to later how that's changed from you maybe asking people to be on the podcast to them now reaching out to you in terms of wanting to be on the podcast. Which is
always lovely, and it's always
exciting.
weird how people end up coming on the show. It's through so many different ways as well. Yeah. And I think what's lovely is that the other thing that surprised me is how nice online communities are. So a lot of people I've just met from doing the show, I've connected with other creatives who also maybe have a podcast or have a YouTube channel or do something online, and it brings you together with all these amazing people. So the community aspect that we've created from Just Get a Real Job is amazing.
Yeah, and obviously you mentioned about how time consuming and how much work goes into it, and obviously you and I work together
on
in our day jobs,
which is very time consuming.
And I've witnessed you legging it from work to be like, I'm interviewing someone in 45 minutes, I need to get back to the south side. And so obviously that's a big part of it as well, like navigating. Although you put a lot of work into it, and obviously it's been successful, it is something that you do as a passion project.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't make there's no secret, if anything, I'm bleeding money on this show.
But you love it, and so it's just, I suppose, how have you found the balance, the navigation of doing it with your full-time job as well?
Hard. I'm better at taking time off now for it. Like I used to try and do it every week without fail. We'll now just have like a few weeks off if we need to. I don't need to put an episode every week because it's also quality over quantity. Like I want the actual stuff we're putting out to be good. So sometimes you can just have a week where we don't need to put an episode out, and if it means that the next episode that comes out is going to be better, then that's.
And I suppose people find the episodes based on, I mean, obviously you'll have your regular listeners, but people will find the episode that most relates to what they're searching for.
Completely, because if you're a producer, you probably don't want to listen to an actor talking about themselves as much, maybe. For example, not always, but I do find it sometimes very role specific. So we did, I had an amazing costume designer, Mabel Lee, on a few weeks ago. Loads of amazing people in costume are like listening to it and reaching out, but they probably won't be interested in every episode of the show, which is totally fine. That's part of the process. And then there is those lovely regular listeners that will just come and listen to anyone talk.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of what's great about it, is that it talks about so many different areas of the industry.
Yeah, completely.
And having that just as something for people to go to find, to hear someone speak about, whatever the department is they're speaking about.
And that's what makes it so worthwhile, to be honest, is like, you feel like you're helping people understand something. I learn a lot from it, but it's always nice when other people can take something
you and say, a bit of
wisdom.
Thank you for doing this. And
that's the best. I think that's, again, going back to something that surprises me, like that never gets old. Like any one message, even a week, that's like the week made for me.
And even like you say, finding out that people are listening in the most random countries, so you're like,
why is somebody in Peru listening to Just Get a Real Job? It could just be a bot, we don't know, but
no, I'm sure it's not.
It's a little artist in Peru or something.
So another question we had for you was, what 3 tips would you give someone who wants to start a creative industries podcast? Fantastic question.
That's a good question. Who sent that one in. Oh wow, is that you in here? So 3 tips. I'm trying to think of it in 3. I think the first one is do it for the right reason. So I think if you want to go into podcasting because you think it's going to make you loads of money and you're going to be really famous, probably not likely, or at least it's going to take a long time. So I think it takes a lot of work. So for me, I think you have to really be passionate about what you're doing, because I put a lot of, I mean, what we've done 154 episodes. Amazing. It's a lot of hours of, and that's just what we put out. Like there's the emails you have to send. There's all the social media stuff and the mental research, all that stuff. So it is. I think the first would probably be prepared and kind of know what the reason you're doing it.
Yeah.
The second would be maybe think about what your niche is as a podcast, because as we know, there's lots and lots of podcasts. Like, I'm not saying Just Get Real Job's the most original podcast in the world. It's obviously an interview podcast, there's lots of them, but I think what maybe makes us different is that we have a lot of younger emerging creatives on, and there's not a lot of things like this in Scotland particularly, or the UK. There's some great other podcasts out there, like The Director's Take, and there's a new podcast I recently discovered a few weeks ago called Getting Into TV, which is doing some amazing things as well, and they're kind of maybe a bit similar to us, but I think there's not a lot of things in this space, and I think there's definitely a value there. So I think about your niche and what your value could be for people. And the third would probably be prepared to make mistakes. Yeah. I'm still learning. Like, do you know what I mean? I look back at reels I even made like 4 months ago, and I'm like, they were really badly made. I could have done that so much easier. So I think always the thing with social media as well, if you're trying to grow a show, is it changes all the time. So when I first was on Instagram 4 years ago, it was all pictures. Yeah. Now it's real. Do you know what I mean? So things change. So I suppose you have to be bad for a bit to be good. And even just interviewing people, like, you know, I'm still learning now. Yeah. But the more you do it, then the better, the more.
And you'll get quicker at it, and you'll understand from engagement. Yeah. Well, that post didn't get anything, but then completely that random one that I didn't put any time into got thousands of views. So it's understanding like where your sort of niche is and who's listening and where.
Completely.
So, yeah.
And you have to be prepared to be bad. Like, for example, I'm not used to being on camera in this way, so in truth, I'm a little bit, this is out my comfort zone. So I'm, you know, I'll probably, if the more I do something like this in the studio, I'll probably get more comfortable.
Yeah, you'd forget it was there. Yeah, no, definitely. Cool.
So good question so far.
I sort of asked you what made you start the podcast, but obviously we've talked a little bit about the time and stuff you put into it. I suppose the next question is what makes you keep going with it, and also, do you have those moments where you are thinking, like, should I keep going with this? And if so, what turns it around for you and makes you continue?
So there's this thing I struggle with, and like sometimes it's an entitlement thing. So some days you get frustrated if people haven't listened to the show, but I try and remind myself, like, you're not entitled for people to have to, like, no one, like, you can't just expect people to just listen to the show because you put lots of work into it. It has to have value for them. It has to be a reason for them to listen. So I try and remind myself that, because like the downloads fluctuate. Like some days we have, like on Monday, I think there was like, we had maybe like 180 downloads in a day, and that wasn't even putting a new episode out. That was just people, which is amazing. And then yesterday it was maybe like 8 people. Yeah. So trying not to like attach that value to it.
Exactly.
Because it does sometimes I do go, there's a lot of work is at any point. But I think what keeps me going is I love doing it. So I don't do this for the downloads anyway. Like it's a bonus when people listen. I'll keep doing this if 2 people listen a week because I love it and I'm passionate about it. And I don't think there's ever been a moment that like I've thought,
I'm not going to do this.
Yeah. Without oversharing, like I was on a date a few days ago, and the point of the date where I felt like I was being my most offended, I feel like I'm massively oversharing on the show. The point of the date that I felt like I was most like myself was I was talking about the podcast, and I sounded so passionate about it. I know, what a wanker, but they were asking, what are your like passions, what's your like, you know, that sort of question, and I think that's when I know that I'm doing.
Well, even if the date didn't work out, you might have gone, you listener.
Thanks for telling the listeners that it didn't work.
Thanks for listening to the episode at least, even if a second date isn't happening.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotta be yourself on this. Why the fuck not?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, and I suppose as well, like what one of the good things that you do, you talked about it just briefly earlier, is the sort of element of you've done a couple of live Fringe things and stuff like that. You've done a couple of other live stuff. So
yeah,
what's great about the different guests and stuff that you have on is that you're putting it out there, and obviously a lot of people, you know, your family and friends are always going to say, oh, we listened to the podcast and we really enjoyed it. But what's great is that because you're having a different guest on every show, you are also tapping into either people who are interested in them or their fan base, which is already established. So it's not necessarily an echo chamber of just your family and friends.
Completely. You were always getting new followers most weeks from that. And even if they don't listen to every episode, they stick around. And that's a great way of finding new listeners and getting new guests on and stuff. And that's one of my favorite things about it, because we do have such a variety of people on from so many different parts of life, and it is great to like, and they usually stay in. A lot of our guests end up listening, which is always a lovely feeling.
Yeah, that's good.
And they come back, or we stay in touch. Like I've made friends from doing this, and it's a great feeling.
Yeah, I think it is for me, even just as someone who listens to podcasts, I think when you find one that you like are interested in, even if you're not necessarily interested in the topic, you wouldn't have been drawn to the topic of that episode, but because you know the podcast, and as you say, you come away from the episode having learned something.
Completely.
So there's episodes I've listened to of yours where I've been, interested, not necessarily directly interested in the subject, but come away going, oh, I found out a bit more about that, and informative and entertaining.
And I think what I try to do with it is make it like there's wisdom there that could apply to even if you didn't work in there. I have a few friends that listen who don't have anything to do with the creative industries, and there's still I've stuff to take away.
Yeah,
life lessons. People who have interesting stories
as well.
Date
stories.
There you go. I mean, we'll not be talking about any of that stuff ever again on the show. I'm sure some of our colleagues who are listening will be enjoying that a bit too much.
Yeah, exactly. But so following on from that, what you were talking about just a minute ago is there any other advice you would give yourself 4 years ago?
Advice I'd give myself? I would just generally say, don't stop being so hard on yourself about it. Just enjoy it. Because I'm so hard on myself. I think no one's going to criticize me more than I'll criticize.
What were you hardest on yourself
I'm
about?
hard on myself now. I'll do like an interview and I'll think, I wasn't very good there, and I'll listen back and I'm like, no, it was actually quite good, but like I'll just always look for what I did wrong. Or someday I'll, if I get one negative tweet, which doesn't happen very often because I'm not massive online for people to really hate me, but you know what I mean, I'll always look for the negative review even if there's 6 good reviews. That way,
human nature.
It's that thing which you have to work on. So I find that stuff, I'm definitely hard. So I'd probably say enjoy it, and just you're doing it for the right reasons already, so I wouldn't change anything.
I was going to say, because you seem like just the sort of person, from knowing you at work and stuff, that you're never someone I think who would probably come into a podcast unprepared, or that you haven't done your research on the guest, which is one of the things I think probably would be where other people might fall off and kick themselves after. But for you, it's mainly to do with like you say, the being natural in terms of the interviews themselves.
I find it kind of is an easy thing for me, and the more you do it, I suppose, but it's kind of instinctual. I think a lot of people love talking about themselves. And usually you just need to follow that thread. So sometimes the best interviews I've done, though, I've not even asked all the questions I planned to ask. They just go off and that happened. We did an episode a few weeks ago with Philip Ralph. It was a deep dive into the crisis in TV. Probably the best episode ever done in terms of engagement and downloads. It's not our most downloaded yet, but it's heading there now.
It's getting there,
And we never had an episode cut through in that way. And that I didn't intend to talk about all the issues in TV for the first 40 minutes of that episode. I'd planned to talk about it, but I would probably normally start with someone's story. But it just went on that way, and
it just sometimes naturally.
So it's good to be prepared, but I think there's a balance.
Great. So obviously we spoke about the fact that we work together in our day jobs at River City, the TV show. How what is it like to work in TV as a script editor? What do you enjoy about it? What's challenging about it? Because you've had other script editors on the podcast, including myself. But what's your take on that role?
I'll not explain what a script editor is again, because I feel like we only use our time to get through these questions, and I think we'd had that on the podcast a few times. But I suppose what it's like is I think the thing I like about it most is it's a very creative job, constantly problem solving, and every day is different. I think I said to you this tonight because I got a funny email from a writer, and I'm like, sometimes you even write notes and you're like, this is so random. No week or days the same. And you always think when you get through a hard week, I wonder what next week's going to throw up, because there's always some random stuff you have to deal with. So I think I like that, and I like working with people, whether it be other script editors like yourself, or working with amazing writers who are so creative and very talented, and it's amazing to feel like you're part of that and you can take them on a sort of journey as a writer. It's actually really similar to podcasting in a lot of ways, because you feel like you're managing someone else. I feel like that as an interviewer, I'm not used to being on the other side of this. I find this kind of unnatural, because I like to sort of guide the guest.
Communication.
It's communication. I think they're the two most essential parts of script editing is communication, and podcasting's a form of it. So I'd say,
and especially because I'm sure people who have listened know before, but River City is a continuing drama, so the pace in which that you're saying no 2 weeks are the same, but also the pace that we work at is different to other dramas that kind of have loads of time to develop scripts and then shoot it, whereas we're like, okay, that scene's filming tomorrow.
Massive volume of stuff, but it's a cool thing to do. I try to remind myself that, because sometimes I think I've been working in TV for like nearly 4 years as well.
Yeah,
just kind of not long after the podcast started, and sometimes you do take it for granted if it becomes a sort of normal job to you. So I try to remind myself if I'm going for a walk on the set or something at lunch, like, this is pretty cool. Like, to be here.
Not everyone gets to
not everyone gets
that,
to do it, especially at the moment we're in such a horrible time in the industry where 57% of people working in TV, I think, are out of work. So, you know, not to be, I think it's a balance of saying you're grateful and lucky, because sometimes I think people say that and then they settle for things they're not happy with. But I think at the same time, I do feel grateful and I do feel lucky.
Sure. And also 4 years ago when you started the podcast, you were probably hoping to be in the position that you're in now. So it's
I would
always
be betting your hand off for it. I don't think I think it's insane, actually.
It's always useful to keep that in mind and put into perspective and stuff, that
definitely,
that there's other people clawing at your heels to bring you down so they can get in your space.
No, but the other thing about this is, right, I want to hold the door open, but I think it's so important in our, especially the creative industry, to try and hold the door open behind you and put the ladders down to people that are maybe struggling to navigate it. Because coming from a working class background, coming from a town like Glenrothes, like I didn't have a clue how to get into it. Like, I'm still figuring out myself. But so if I can help other people learn that through these conversations, that's the mission of the podcast at the end of the day.
Really helps, I think, because my view growing up in Bonnybridge was people who worked in TV were men in their 50s in grey suits who sat behind big desks. And, you know, and it was just, I don't even know what I thought their jobs were, but I just thought it was never something that I could do. And then you'll know as well, the roles that we know exist that are sort of entry level roles, a lot of people don't even really know exist.
No,
still.
no one talks about it in school.
Like, researcher, you know.
No, completely. And again, that's one of the things that I try to do with this show, is to like let people understand what the different roles are, what maybe some of the pathways are. Because it is a very, very elitist industry still. Across the creative industries. If you don't come from money, or you don't grow up and your dad's like a casting director, or it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder. So I think it's important to have shows like this, or the podcast I referenced earlier.
Definitely. Well, you're doing fantastic in your career, Jamie. So leads me on to my next question is, what are you most proud of so far in your career? In terms of your career,
Oof, that's a really hard question. I'd actually probably say the day I got the Beck2 traineeship 3 years ago, because that was like insane. Because I'd worked in COVID as an assistant. And I was just handing out masks and doing temperature checks and stuff. And it was a fun job.
What was that on?
It was on a show called Karen Perry, which really weirdly was set in Fife. We didn't film there. We didn't really film in Fife. We filmed a few days there, but we filmed at a police station in Stirling, and the police station was meant to be Glenrothes police station. So that is really spooky, isn't it? Like that being your sort of first big job. So I was doing that, and it was a grueling job. And I was still working in care at the same
drama
time.
Though. It was
a
really
big drama to be
drama,
on. It was cool, but that was a hard job. So I think getting that first sort of proper foot in the door to be somewhere like STV Drama and work with those people, I think just getting that call was probably the proudest moment, because I got to, that was the first time I went full time, and I suppose.
And you sort of get that feeling of, okay, the relief, like the relief. My foot's kind of got in the door a little bit.
I got to quit the, my part-time job at the time, or my real job, or whatever you call it. I got to quit it for the first time, and I've somehow stayed in employment since. So touch wood. But it's not the most secure industry, as we both know. As well, you're never guaranteed anything in a job like this. But it's nice to sort of feel like you were accepted almost.
And how long were you in? That was a year, was it? You did that role?
So I did the traineeship for 6 months, and I was at STV for 2 years in total as an assistant script thereafter. So and it was a really good time there. And then I was obviously lucky to get onto Riverside after it. So I've been very fortunate in my career. Things lined up quite well for me, actually, so I can't complain.
Well, you've worked hard and put the hours in.
It does help as well.
And then, so what's your favourite moment from podcasting, I suppose? Your favourite moment or your favourite guest, maybe?
Oh my God, it's so hard.
I mean, I suppose you can't pick a favourite guest, can you? That'd be like Sophie's Choice.
No, it's so, honestly, like, it's such, I know it sounds cheesy, but like, you couldn't choose that. But there's definitely been moments which mean a lot to me. Like, I think the Fringe show's incredible. Like, I think the first year at the Fringe was the most enjoyable, purely because it was like, wow. And it was a weird time because my gran actually passed away on the second podcast show we did. So it was the day of our second live show. And that's our most downloaded episode. So I think that's quite like a nice little spooky coincidence, weirdly, with the amazing Black Scott pod we had on. So the Fringe stuff they were lovely moments.
They were live as well, weren't
they? They were all live, although saying that, like, I can't really separate any of the live shows because they'd all been like quite special. So maybe one of them would be a favourite moment. I think also actually there was a time I went into London once when I was working at STV for work. I know, London, there you go. Where I'm going tomorrow actually. We can't say that at work without going London. So yeah, I was down in London for work, and then I met some podcast people I'd interviewed. So a guy called Joe O'Neill I met, who I know from podcasting, and then he was like, this other guest that had on called Jasmine was doing a comedy gig, so we went to see her gig, and then another guest that had on came along, and then another guest. So there was 5 people I'd interviewed who I don't even know in real life, I'd met on the internet.
That's amazing.
We ended up all being together in this comedy venue, and we got this photo. There's a photo of it on Instagram. I'll maybe put it in the a little clip of it here, but like that was quite a whoa, like I got to meet all these people from this, so that was quite a special moment.
Nice.
But just getting to do like on a random Tuesday night coming home from work and just getting to have a chat with someone, and you learn a lot from it.
Yeah, like so it must be quite invigorating, quite refreshing as well, because although we love our job, it sometimes can be, I mean, it's the norm for you, so sometimes you feel a bit like when you leave. So then to leave work and come home and then do something that's in the same industry, but you're hearing about someone else, and it invigorates your mind, gets your brain going. So I'd imagine that's quite a nice thing to do. I don't really ever leave an interview not feeling great after it, to be honest. I usually have a massive buzz from it. So when I wear my like tracker, my Whoop tracker, or like on stage doing a live show, it always thinks I've done like a massive run or something. I think my heart must be going like that. Oh, during the recording?
Not always in an interview now. Maybe I'm more used to it. But yeah, so I always find that quite interesting.
That is cool.
We're not sponsored by Whoop, by the way, so there we go. Managed to get that in there. There we go.
So one of the other questions that came in was, do you have to be extroverted to succeed in the industry if you don't come from privilege, which I know you touched on?
That's a good question, actually. No, I don't. Of course you don't have to be extroverted. I think a lot of writers are actually probably quite introverted. Yeah. I think being extroverted, if you can't tell, I'm very extroverted. I do a podcast for God's sake. But I don't think all podcasts are actually necessarily extroverted. No. But I do think, I think finding how to communicate that in a way that suits you is probably important. So I think networking, a lot of people ask like, how do you network and stuff? I get asked that a lot by people wanting to work in the industry. I actually, believe it or not, I don't think I'm the best networker in the world. I like to have conversation with people. I don't really like feeling transactional and stuff.
I feel the same.
Like I don't like going to things and going, well, I'm actually trying to be a better hustler and stuff for this show, because I'm trying to get more sponsors and trying to like push it more. And I'm not actually naturally very good at that. So I know I'm kind of maybe deviated away from that question slightly, but no, I think to answer that, you don't have to be extroverted. No. I think obviously, as we mentioned earlier, having some privilege behind you probably helps. But again, this industry is for everyone, and I think you can definitely make it work without that.
I think the privilege helps you get in the door maybe a little quicker, but I think certainly in the places that I've worked, if you don't put the work in, you're out the door just as quick, because there's not the time, especially in continuing drama where we are. If you are just there and you're mucking around and you're on your phone and you're not pulling your weight, it doesn't really matter who your family is or what your name is, because if you can't do the job and you can't keep up, then you can't slow everything down. So I think it maybe helps you get in, but not stay there.
I don't think those two things are tied though. The extrovert and being extroverted and privileged thing. Like I think the other thing I suppose the privilege gets you, it gives you the opportunity to like take more risks in your career, and it is an unstable career, so you can maybe afford to have times off. Or if you're maybe something like an actor, you can have time to just focus fully on that, whereas a lot of people are working jobs to do that. So being a creative is really hard at the moment. So
that's true.
I think it is something you have to just not be hard on yourself from if you don't come from money in this industry. But it doesn't mean you can't achieve it. No. I mean, look, look at us. We
both working class.
Yeah, you have to just work really hard and try and use your agency as much as you can, which is easier said than done.
Yeah.
And it's not fair, but you have to sometimes you have to keep going.
Yeah, and also that satisfaction, that feeling that you spoke about a minute ago of when you got the phone call about the Becto thing, like that just makes you appreciate it so much 100%. More, because you're like, you've put the work in and you've worked hard for definitely. It. So yeah, I would agree. So similarly, what's your advice for people who are introverted or anxious when it comes to networking?
I feel like I might have maybe already answered that.
I think you have
there, because I think, again, like if you're a really introverted, anxious person, like don't need to necessarily go to a networking night. You could start a podcast and interview people, or like you could maybe just go for a coffee one-on-one with someone, or just send a nice email. I think you can, whatever sort of suits you best. I think embracing your strengths as well. And go again. It's that thing I said earlier about niches for like when you start a podcast. Like, what's your like niche selling point as well? Think about that. Like,
I think as well. Like, and if you're introverted, like finding. So, for example, the podcast is about creative industries and speaking to other people about creative industries. So you're automatically linked on a subject. So, like, if I was to go to a networking event on like something I knew nothing about, I would be so nervous. But if I was to go to one on like music or horror films, and I found other people there that were interested in music or horror films, then you automatically find, because you've got that common interest, you would obviously be nervous to walk in. But then when you realise everyone's like you, there's in there as well.
No, it's easier. True. I think as well, like just thinking about it as I'm having a conversation with somebody, I'm not trying to get something from them is probably helpful. Like it's basically what you said. Like if I go up to you and I say I didn't know you, Adair, and I just go up to you and I know Adair likes horror films, for example, and I just go, I'm just going to have a conversation with Adair about horror films. I'm not trying to get a contract or a job out of it. If you think about it like that, then it's going to happen way more naturally. And then maybe further down the line, like if you like someone, you make a connection, then it could lead to something. But it doesn't I think just accepting it's not always going. And a lot of people at these events are in the same boat as you as well. I think that's the other thing. Most people are kind of nervous and aren't in the
I suppose that's probably the negative. I suppose the word networking in itself is quite a negative thing, because it does give you that illusion of people like climbing. Like they're there because they're networking, because they want to get somewhere. Whereas that's not always the case. Sometimes it's just people there to meet like-minded people.
And I think it's okay to want something or to want to get something. But again, if you just approach it like you're having a conversation with someone, then it's probably going to be a lot easier.
Yeah, not turning away as soon as you realise you can't get what you want.
Which people do, weirdly. People do that. That feeling when somebody's looking over your shoulder. It's not, we don't experience
ready to move on to the next person.
Exactly. I mean, and it's fine if you want to get out of a conversation, but which I'm not very good at doing. I'm quite an awkward person, so I'm not the right one to ask what people's tips are for that.
I'm quite an extroverted person, and I don't network very well. I normally stand with a glass of wine talking to the same people I came with.
Me too. I did the same.
It's really bad. What would you say, I know you didn't want to talk about favourites, but what would you say is the most memorable episode of the podcast that you've recorded over the 4 years?
There's been quite a few, to be fair, but so we'd had Dictator, who are an amazing band from Livingston. We'd had them on twice. We did the Fringe with them last year. That was incredible kind of indie rock. They're smashing at the moment. So the boys from Dictator and Brown Bear, Matt Hickman. I've had Matt on 4 times on the show. There's people like that who you meet who make such an impression on you, and you get to sort of become kind of friendly with, and and I really like their music. I've only from doing this show, like I maybe liked a few songs when I interviewed them, and now I actually follow them and get to see what they're doing. So I suppose those moments are really nice, getting to see guests. I mean, at the weekend, 4 of our previous guests won a BAFTA.
That's amazing.
Which is amazing. So you feel happy for them because you know them. And you get to sort of interview them, and you feel part of their sort of journey, and you want to see them do well. So stuff like that. I'm trying to think of like a specific episode, maybe probably the one with Philip Ralph 2 or 3 weeks ago, because it's really recent, because that's resonated with people so much. And Phil is incredible, and I think the activism he's doing on this industry is incredible, and what he's done for writers and people in the arts that are struggling is really keeping that conversation going. And that, so I'd probably say that at the moment, but there's so many other ones, like Mervyn Starr we had on, who'd done Pick of the Fringe for 30 years. Incredible speaking to someone like him who's done it. We'd have people like Jane McCarry from Still Game on. I mean, that's the other thing about podcasting. You sometimes measure your worth from the guests you'd had on, like the big guests. And I'm trying to not do that as much. Because sometimes people go, oh, who have you interviewed? And you want to say the big ones. But some of the best episodes we've done have been people that you would never have heard of.
And also you don't know where people are going to go. That's the thing. Like completely. You say, like you can have someone on at this very start of their career.
Actually, just reminded me something I should say is talking about moments, just saying exactly that. And I'm probably Sean Fagan. I was going to say I've forgotten his name there. So there's an amazing actor called Sean Fagan and Jack McLaughlin, who they're both from Liverpool, and they had them on the show like 2-3 years ago, and they were kind of on the up and coming. And Sean got cast in Boiling Point as one of the lead roles in the new series, and he reached out to me to say, I'd seen he got the role, but he reached down to say, can we come back on the podcast? As if he was asking me. I'm like, yeah, of course you can. So it was amazing to have them back on and to see that Sean had been in Boiling Point on the BBC and Jack had got to film the behind the scenes documentary. So to have those two boys back on was quite special because when I'd interviewed them the first time, I was also working in care still. So we'd all three of us had gone on a journey. So that was amazing.
That's great. And it's nice that people are loyal to remember the fact that you gave them a chance to come on and speak, and wherever they go in the future, people want to come back. Yeah, exactly.
And that's lovely. That's the best thing about it is you get to track people's journeys. Yeah, for sure.
Nice.
It's always nice having a guest back on right now. So
shout out to all those people who won BAFTAs. That's fantastic.
How are we doing for time? Just got to quickly check. There we're good. We got 8.
We're doing all right. Yeah.
Graham.
Cool.
Perfect. See, this is why I'm not used to not being the host, you know what I mean?
I know, I wasn't keeping a track in time. So what's the best piece of advice you've received in the last 4 years?
Best piece of advice? Oh, that's a good question. So I always think about it because people ask that. That's quite a common question I ask people. And then I always think, what would I answer? I probably have 2. So I got this from a podcast called Modern Wisdom with Chris Williams, which I love. Jimmy Carr, I think, was the guest that said it.
What was
and
the
it's
podcast,
quite a simple
sorry?
idea. Modern Wisdom, it's called. It's a huge podcast. And it's one of the biggest. So I don't know if Chris doesn't need my help plugging it right. People should go and listen because it's incredible podcast. But he was talking about this idea of like, what can you do for yourself tomorrow that would improve, even like thinking about it in the small scale, like what's something you can do today that's going to make your day better tomorrow. I'm not saying this as articulate as he said it, but so it's even thinking about it in the sense like, if there's something I could do today that's going to make tomorrow 5% easier, what could that be? So there's little things like, even like, I'm going to have a really busy week, so I'll make dinner on Monday night. So when I've got this podcast at the studio on Wednesday, I can go home and I just have to stick it in the microwave for 2 minutes. It can be anything from that, which is so simple, to something like, I don't know, I'll lay my clothes out the night before. Just really small things, but it makes such a difference just to think like that.
Yeah.
So
in terms of like your promotion and stuff as well, which is the bit that everyone hates doing for any kind of thing that you have to do yourself. Even just things like batch making some reels so that you've got
exactly that, or recording 6 weeks ahead with shows that have like anything like that, little things that are going to make. They're just many life hacks, really. But I think that sort of thing is really, really, I mean, as a bit of advice, just framing it like that. And you can apply it to things like career if you think in a longer time frame, like thinking like, well, maybe it doesn't feel like I have a lot of control over the next 6 months, but if I'd keep doing this thing, maybe in 2 years I'll get to this point, and I'll keep showing up consistently and thinking about how that's going to help your future self when you do things now.
I don't know if how much you've thought about this, but consistency in terms of things like this is obviously really important because your audience, although you were saying you don't feel the need to put one out every week, like it's not like TV where people are sitting down and waiting for it, at 6 p.m. on a Thursday waiting for a new episode. But at the same time, if you have a massive gap, people
will forget and
they
follow the habit as well.
Exactly. So like, for example, I was talking about listening at the gym. So I suppose if you fall out of that habit, then you can't leave it too long.
There's plenty of other podcasts to fill the gap to come and take your slot. So
exactly. Cool.
No, that definitely. I think the other one, which I love, is about they have more probably something I'm learning from podcasts as well, but it's like you have more agency than you think. And again, this comes back for me. Sometimes it's easy to think, well, I come from a working class background, or I'm dyslexic and dyspraxic. I'm not good at this thing, so I can never do that. And you make excuses for yourself. And you go, well, it's not possible, but you actually have way more agency than you think. Like, I'm not, and I don't want to sound like I'm doing that magical realism thing where not everything's possible, because there's some things you can't control, and there's not always that job or there's not always that opportunity, but you can make other opportunities that will get you there, even if it's small things like you can send an email or, I don't know about this thing, so I'll reach out to this person who does, and I'll just ask them a question. And it's just thinking about it like that. You have more sort of control and say than you sometimes think.
And also sometimes reaching out for one thing leads to another. And even if you can't achieve the original thing, then it opens it up to the possibility, or you meet someone through someone, or someone remembers you because you emailed and you weren't quite right for that, but then you connect with someone else through that. So
completely. It's like even doing an interview, even if you think, I'm never going to get this job, and you think you may be underqualified, even applying, They'd seen your CV. It's little tiny things. It's thinking about things like that, like in a longer. I think we often need to think in the short term, and if it's maybe partly social media, you see someone you want a quick hit. Yeah. We think like that for life sometimes. I think obviously it's you only live once. You've got to make things happen. You want to enjoy the present, but I think you thinking in the longer term and thinking that you have more sort of control and agency than you maybe think.
Yeah, push through and not let the self-saboteur come in and just, like you say, just get it done.
That's definitely advice that has helped me.
Cool. What do you think the industry needs to tackle burnout and imposter syndrome? Sorry. Two very real things.
Very real things. So we did a poll on the Instagram account, I think back in April. Right. 96% of people said they had imposter syndrome that we pulled from the creative industry. So that's obviously just our followers. It's not the biggest sample size, but it's a good indication that many people. I feel imposter syndrome all the time. Me too. I often feel burnout sometimes. I know you work very long hours as well. Sometimes, like, I don't know if I have the answer fully to that question, because it's a systemic thing that I think the creative industries suffers from. I think go and listen to that episode we did with Phil at Ralph. I keep banging on about, because there's some great points about that there. But I do think, I think we talked about this a lot on the podcast. I think the industry sometimes maybe needs to look at itself, like especially in TV, which I'm more qualified to talk about because I work in it, like things like working hours, culture, like things like long meetings, stress. Like there's so many things there that maybe we need to look at and think about how can we maybe modernize and do this in a way that's going to look after our crew and our staff better. It's a bit of it's hard to articulate that answer, to be honest, because it's such a big issue.
And especially, good question, no? I mean, we're quite lucky in a way in our job that we work sort of office hours.
We do.
If you're working, say, on a shoot that's a location, you're not working normal hours. So where's the limit of we don't go past that time, or if we do, we don't show up until this time the next day? Because everyone wants to get things done, but it should never be to the point where you're
the detriment of your health or mental health and your stuff. But I also think because we're on short contracts sometimes, or we're not got that security, you feel like you constantly have to prove yourself to be there, and that can lead to burnout. I find that quite difficult sometimes. So it can be hard. So I think it is a real problem, and a really good question ever asked that one as well, because it is an important thing, and it's something I want to keep exploring on the show and doing episodes about and stuff as well.
And everyone you speak to, regardless of what level they're at, talks about imposter syndrome. And I think you're right. I think that systemic thing of linked to what we were talking about earlier about being working class and that vision of the people who we imagined worked in TV when we were growing up and thinking that was unobtainable. So then to be in the position of it, you almost feel like someone's going to find me out that I don't belong here, you know what I mean? Or when are they going to realise? So I think it's a much bigger change needs to happen.
Completely. And I think the other thing to make people feel better about imposter syndrome is I know exec producers and quite famous actors that suffer from imposter syndrome. And you would be shocked, because you only see the good parts as well on social media, don't you? You don't know what people are actually thinking or feeling. So there's loads of really successful podcasters who had the pleasure of meeting a wee bit, or like know of and stuff, who I've heard say the same thing as well on their own show. Like it's not, people aren't always having as good a time as it seems. So there's a cost.
Exactly. So something a bit lighter. Dream guest. Who would the dream guest? Who would you love to say just get a real job to? They can be alive or dead.
Alive or dead.
Who would you love to have on the podcast? I mean, obviously you've had me on twice now, so that's peaked for you. But
there we go. There's so many people. It's such a difficult question to answer. I was thinking about this today because I knew this would probably be a question when I saw the Instagram ones that came through, because I tried to not look at the questions people sent in too much, so I didn't want to overthink them. So I think maybe probably Billy Connolly actually would be one, because what an icon. He's lived such an incredible life. I watched that documentary he did in the 80s, I think, when he does a tour of Ireland. Such an amazing guy. Like, I'd love to he'd have some good stories, wouldn't he?
He definitely would have some good stories.
And then I was trying to think other answers, because what
would you want to talk to him about, though, I suppose?
I'd love to talk to Billy Connolly about his life in general. But it'd be interesting to maybe ask him what he thinks about stand-up and things now, and how things have changed since he sort of started. And I'm trying to think of maybe a younger guest who, maybe, because a lot of, as I was saying earlier, a lot of the guests we have are maybe more towards the start of their journeys in the creative industry as well. And I think that's something people respond really well to on the show, is that we do have people that are starting out as well. So I'm trying to think of a younger person, and my mind's totally went blank. But maybe it'd be cool to speak to someone like, musicians as well, who I love. My mind is actually gone so blank.
You mean like a younger person who is already established, or a younger person who is starting out?
I think both. I mean, there's a lot of the guests I have on my dream list, people probably have never heard of as well. Like I don't want to read them out right now because, you know, we might, but I'm hoping they're going to happen. But I've got like a massive spreadsheet of people I'd love to talk to.
Yeah.
And a lot of them aren't famous, but I suppose dream guests, like someone like Adam Buxton, whose podcast I've listened to for so long. He's like one of the OG sort of podcasters in the UK. Like he'd be amazing to talk to.
Yeah.
It'd be amazing to speak to directors, maybe someone like Edgar Wright or, you know, Greta Gerwig, those sort of people. Richard Linklater would be amazing to speak to. I love, you know, the Before trilogy. I bang on about it all the time. So if those there's so many. Yeah. There's such a hard question to answer though. In my mind, I'm going to think as soon as we leave this studio, I'll go.
One day, manifest it, Jamie, manifest it. If we have Richard Linklater on, I'm coming.
Actually, know who my dream guest would be? David Nichol, who wrote One Day, because I met him this year.
Oh wow!
At a book signing, and I feel like I made a total arse of myself. So.
Oh really? No, I'm sure
so
you were
bad.
Were you?
I just overshared stuff from it. It was quite a cringy moment.
Before you went.
No, nothing like that. I just sort of made a joke about an ex-girlfriend who had the same name as the character in the book, and he just looked like he was like, oh my god, this guy's going for a lot. And so I think I maybe overthought the interaction. So David, I'm sorry.
I'm sure he was laughing about it. I'm sure you popped into his head later on and was like,
that was a bit intense. I just was a bit nervous and maybe came across more intense than I meant to.
Yeah. What surprised you most about the industry in the last 4 years?
Surprised me most, I think probably the thing we were talking about earlier. I think how like difficult it is to have a stable career in it. I think I maybe was a bit naive about it. I think I kind of thought once you're in, surely you're fine. I think it's so unstable at the moment, more than ever actually. There's not a lot. It's really hard to have long-term security, and I personally, as someone who likes to feel secure financially and stuff, I struggle with that a lot. So I think that's probably the thing that surprises me most, how unsustainable it is and how hard to sort of plan things. It's built on freelancers, and I personally don't agree with it. I think there should be more. I think if you give people more permanency, you can take more risks and make better art. Yeah, exactly. But there's not that model, unfortunately, at the moment economically that exists. So it would take a lot of reform. But yeah, I don't know how to solve that. But I think that's definitely surprised me most.
Yeah. Well, hopefully on the upturn soon. We'll see.
We'll see.
What would your granddad be most proud of you for? And similarly, your Granny Jones. Tell us a bit of background on your granddad and Granny Jones first of all.
Yeah, so I've got I've grown up, I had 3 grandparents because my mum's dad died when she was like 13, so I never knew my other granddad. So growing up, I have my granddad who's mentioned there, and my granny Mac who's still alive to this day, and then on my other side of the family, I had my Gran Jones who. And my granddad died 4 years ago, so I just started the podcast when he died. I'd done like 3 episodes or something.
Okay.
So that was a big driver, and that's such a lovely question. I'm a bit like, wow, that's. I wear the chain I wear all the time. It's got I'll show the camera. It's got my granddad's like nickname Jazz on it.
Oh, nice.
And this was also my granddad. So that's probably one of the biggest bits of grief I've maybe suffered. But like, my granddad and me were like super, super close, and he lived in my street growing up, and very kind man. I've talked about him loads in this podcast because when he died, like the podcast was a great escape and release and stuff. So
it gave you something to focus on, and also something that you think he would have been interested in and tuned in for. And
so I think that was the question. Proud, was it?
Yes. What would your granddad be most proud of you for, and your Granny Jones?
I think my granddad would have been proud of me for anything. You know, when you have someone in your life that just like is such unconditional love, like I would be like a little shit to my mum and dad growing up, and I'd go out to my granddad's house and he would let me away with what, you know what I mean? He'd phone them and go, why have you like
why are you picking on Jamie?
Even though it was me in the wrong. So he's so good to me and my brothers like that, and like so I think he would have been proud of me regardless. But he was very organised, very hard work, and so I think definitely that drive he would have been impressed. We did palliative care, which I was talking about with Risha Amand on the podcast. I'm so bad with names in the show. I say people's names wrong all the time, so I apologise. Reza Ahmed, if I said your name wrong there. But like, I was speaking about palliative care with her and that sort of experience, and I got to do that with both of those, my Grand Jones as well, and like got to be there at the end of his life. And I got my first ever job sort of in TV-ish stuff. I did like a German doner kebab advert as like a runner for the day, and he was actually like it was towards the end of his life, and I told him, he couldn't speak at that point, but I think he knew that something had happened. So I kind of got to share a wee bit with him, and I think he was definitely
proud. Was he interested in creative industries, or
not
where
like
was
particularly. He was a bit old. He was old. He was a bus driver.
Oh, nice.
And he worked in the dairies and he was in the RAF and stuff. But he was always supportive. He came to see this when I did a school show. Yeah, he came to see it. He proud of whatever. You know. He would go and see my brother play drums. He just wanted to see us doing something we enjoyed. And my Granny Jones, to talk about her as well, was my mum's mum. She raised 3 daughters on her own, like when her husband died and when my granddad died and stuff. So she was a very strong woman and amazing. And I think she probably been most proud that I went and did that show the day she died, because the reason I did it, obviously it was quite a hard day, but I knew she would have said, get on that stage now. Like, didn't make a, because she didn't like a fuss. She would have been like, don't make a fuss over me. So it's really lovely to get to talk about them on this show like this in that way. So it's a really nice question. That is a lovely question. That's really special. You're right. I'm sure they would have both been very proud of you, and 4 years them both, you've kept it going for. So I know I do. Yeah, my granny always used to say, like, what's for you won't go by you. And I think about that a lot with life and the show and stuff. I know that's something I say that to my best friends in London. Well, I said it to them a few times when we lived together, and now they make fun of me. They'll send like in Scottish accent, what's for you won't go by you. That's a really nice question. I do believe in that. No, it's lovely. A good thing. It's definitely it's just a nice way to think, even if, when you have something doesn't work out. Yeah. And also when something doesn't work out, you don't realise at the time that it hasn't worked out for a reason. No, completely. And then something else comes along and you're like, well, definitely. That's for you won't go by you. Yeah, no, for sure. So what's your future plans for Just Get a Real Job? What's coming up? What's happening? So I've been doing some coaching with I think David, I'm like, what am I going to say? Sorry, everyone, but I think David McIntosh is a podcast, Development My Day podcast, a really good podcast. So I've started doing some coaching with him recently and got some amazing tips, because I wanted to keep growing the show, and it's hard when you do this yourself. And I make mistakes all the time, and figuring out the marketing side is really tough. Yeah. So we're going to try and go on YouTube very shortly. We're going to do a newsletter. Great. Got some amazing guests, recorded some amazing things lined up. Try to do more video stuff, so I'm getting more comfortable doing things like this. Yeah. And just keep like our sort of mission of, the creative industries, and trying to keep our mission of navigating the creative industry, I should say, and keep trying to like make this industry accessible for people, and share those stories, and keep speaking to people, and keep doing what we're doing really, but try and just keep finding new listeners and growing. Yeah. And I suppose for me, I'd sort of talked about it earlier, but like over the 4 years, how have you found the adjustment to, like you say, you started off the podcast thinking, well, I've got some friends who are in the industry, and I'll just start interviewing them. And then obviously what's happened is over time, because you've found an audience, and because it's quite niche, especially for Scotland in terms of talking about this industry and the pockets of it, you've been approached by agents and things like that, saying, can my client come on? That must be a really nice thing, first of all, because you're not having to do the legwork for it. Completely. And I wanted, actually, I'll give a shout out to Chloe Neacham particularly, who are a PR agency I've been working with for 3 years, and they're incredible, and they send me some great guests. We'd had some amazing guests on, and the girls that work there that I worked with over the years have been amazing. So there's loads that's a lovely film when agents get in touch, or people come to you, or when bigger guests say, I'll come on that sounds great. Yeah. Or when people have heard of you, it's a lovely film. At the rap party on Friday at River City Rap Party, I had a few people come up and say, I really enjoyed the episode. And it's like, what? I didn't expect you to have listened to this. So that's really cool. It is a lovely thing. And like you say, also those people who want to come back. Oh, completely. We try and make it a fun experience, but I think it's quite a chill show. I think a lot of people enjoy doing the show, actually. It's a good one to do. It is. Try and make it fun. And I think podcasts, although we made a joke about it being there's so many podcasts, in terms of people in the creative industries wanting to promote something, there aren't really, other than podcasts, there aren't really that many ways anymore to be able to talk about whatever you're doing to an audience, unless you're booked on a radio show or you get, print media and stuff, which is very hard to get. So podcasts are, I guess, although they are saturated, they are the best way of reaching the audience. I think people are crying out for long form conversation. I think that's why they've done so well. And without getting political or taking a stance on it, one of the reasons I think helped Trump win the American election a few weeks ago is that he was on things like Joe Rogan. The podcasts did really cut through. I think they really cut through. Like, I think people are craving long form conversation, because everyone's so quick now.
Yeah.
And I don't think they maybe get the truth in the same way on mainstream media.
No.
And now mainstream media is trying to copy a lot of the podcast sort of YouTube sort of style of making things, but it maybe doesn't work because it doesn't feel real in the way that a show like somebody started themselves in their
I think you're right,
cupboard.
actually. Because even TikTok is changing. Like TikTok came from, I always thought TikTok came from Vine, a slightly longer version of Vine, but now the TikToks that you most engage with are the ones that are over 3 minutes, or
people want
like,
value. Yeah. They want to learn something new to take away. So I think that's definitely true.
And so it's obviously it's a nice thing that these people are reaching out, and it gives you more scope for growing the podcast, which is great. So
it's great.
Hopefully that will continue.
It is really exciting. And I think the other thing I want to quickly mention, you're talking about future plans, is the episode that I was talking about what had happened in TV has done so well, and there's such a good response from it that in January I'm planning on doing a big live stream with lots of experts and people who are working across the creative industries, and that will be more information for listeners on that soon. We're going to do a big live event on what's happening in the industry and what can we all do to change it, and I want to get as many people involved in that as well, and
that sounds
get
cool.
a big community build around it.
Is that like a panel discussion?
So it'll be a panel discussion that will go out live. I don't have a date yet because I'm still in discussion with people, but it'll go out as an episode as well, but it'll be it'll be tied to our sort of going to YouTube, which we'll be doing shortly as well. And
nice.
I'm hoping this will be the first sort of this right now will be the launching of the YouTube and stuff as well. So there's lots of exciting
great. So you'll live stream it, but if people miss the live stream, it will go out as an episode. That's exciting
for sure. And some of the people I've been speaking to already are very impressive guests. So nice. I'm hoping that'll be good, and just keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah, I will tune in for that, definitely. If there's going to be an audience, I'll be in the audience, definitely.
Brilliant. Well, Adair, I think we're coming towards the end of our time, and I really appreciate you hosting this. While we're here, do you want to quickly? I know you'd had some new singles out since you were last on the show. Do you very quickly want to plug that? Because I'm working on new music at the moment. So it's available. Adair Murray on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever. But we're relaunching an EP probably in the springtime with some live shows coming as well. But thank you so much for inviting me to come in and interview you for the 4-year anniversary. Pleasure. It's lovely to be in
as I
this
say,
space.
I'm a fan of the podcast, and here's to the next 4 years of you doing it.
Amazing.
Well done.
Here we go. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for listening and supporting the show. We're going to keep trying to grow it, and it's exciting times. So there we go. First time on camera. We've done all right.
Exactly. Well
Great,
done.
Thank you. There we go.